The one woman who changed how he loves forever. He never knew love could feel like a quiet revolution until she walked into his life. Not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with a presence so steady, so unassuming, that it pulled him out of the patterns he didn't even realize were holding him back. He had loved before, but it was always cautious, measured, as if guarding pieces of himself from being lost. And then she arrived, and suddenly the way he thought about connection, trust, even vulnerability shifted without permission. She didn't fix him. She didn't save him. She simply existed in a way that invited him to see himself differently, to see love differently. And when you experience that kind of change, you notice it in everything. The way you listen, the way you forgive, the way you reach for someone's hand and mean it completely. Some people pass through life. She stayed in the corners of his heart, quietly reshaping him. Love as transformation is the kind of change that sneaks in quietly, reshaping a person from the inside out, often without dramatic announcements. It isn't about fleeting passion or the thrill of excitement. It's about a fundamental shift in the way someone perceives connection, trust, and intimacy. When he first encountered her, he carried a version of love that was defensive and cautious, shaped by past disappointments and fear of loss. He measured affection, timed vulnerability, and protected pieces of himself as though showing them might mean losing them forever. Love, as he understood it, had boundaries and conditions, and he accepted them because that was all he had known. Her presence introduced a different rhythm. It wasn't a forceful re-education, but a subtle unveiling. She demonstrated that love could be patient, consistent, and curious rather than transactional. She offered understanding without judgment, listening without calculating what he owed her in return. This recalibration taught him that love isn't a ledger of debts and credits, but a space where two people can exist with honesty, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. Transformation happens in moments so small they often go unnoticed at first. A look held longer than usual, a word chosen carefully, a gesture of thoughtfulness that doesn't demand recognition. Over time, these moments accumulate, creating a new template for what love feels like and what it deserves. He began to notice his own reactions shifting. He was more patient, less defensive, more willing to extend kindness without immediate reciprocation. His heart started to operate differently, not because he was forced, but because he had learned that opening fully did not guarantee pain. It allowed connection. Love as transformation also challenges old assumptions. It reveals patterns that once seemed natural and exposes the gaps between fear and trust. In her presence, he recognized the walls he had built to protect himself, and he saw that those walls were no longer necessary, not because danger had disappeared, but because he had learned a safer way to navigate intimacy. Transformation through love doesn't erase the past, it integrates it, reshaping experience into wisdom. Each moment spent with her became a lesson in emotional courage, demonstrating that vulnerability is not weakness and that patience is not surrender. Ultimately, love as transformation is invisible from the outside. Others may see a man who smiles more easily or listens more fully, but they cannot measure the subtle rewiring happening beneath the surface. It is the change in thought patterns and expectations, in the willingness to give and receive without fear, that marks the depth of the transformation. This kind of love leaves an enduring imprint because it does not seek to dominate or correct. It simply exists in a way that allows the heart to expand. And when a heart expands, everything else shifts in quiet, profound ways. Vulnerability unlocked is one of the most profound changes someone can inspire in another person, especially in someone who has spent years guarding their heart. Before she appeared, he carried armor shaped by experiences that taught him trust was conditional, affection could be dangerous, and showing weakness might lead to loss. His love was careful, measured, and often incomplete, because exposing too much felt like risking too much. He knew how to love, but only in fragments, holding back pieces of himself that he deemed too fragile or unworthy. Her presence changed that. She didn't demand that he drop his defenses or confess his fears. Instead, she created a space where it was safe to do so. Her patience and attentiveness acted as a quiet invitation. She listened without judgment, responded without criticism, and accepted him without requiring performance. In that space, he realized that vulnerability was not a threat, it was a bridge. By witnessing her steadiness, he began to test the waters, revealing thoughts and emotions he had long hidden. At first, it was tentative, a fleeting confession, a guarded admission, a subtle sharing. But each small act of openness, met with acceptance, reinforced the lesson that being vulnerable didn't have to result in harm. Vulnerability unlocked does not happen all at once. It is cumulative. Each interaction with her chipped away at walls that had once seemed permanent, not through force, but through consistency. She showed him that intimacy could be tender without being dangerous, and that connection was not a contest or a test, but a shared experience. The more he allowed himself to be seen, the more he understood that his fears about exposure had been based on past circumstances, not inevitable outcomes. Her influence taught him that vulnerability was a form of strength, a conscious choice to engage deeply, rather than a passive surrender. This transformation altered the way he approached not only romantic love but all relationships. Where he had been guarded, he became more open. Where he had measured affection, he began to give freely. Where he had anticipated rejection, he learned to extend trust. Vulnerability unlocked, reshaped his understanding of intimacy. It wasn't about losing control or being unprotected, but about engaging fully and authentically. He learned to distinguish between caution and fear, understanding that boundaries could coexist with openness. The change also revealed a deeper truth. Vulnerability is contagious. By lowering his walls, he encouraged openness in others, fostering deeper connections across every aspect of his life. It allowed him to experience empathy on a greater scale, listen with more patience, and act with more compassion. The transformation she inspired was not about dependence or submission. It was about expanding capacity, the ability to feel, to connect, to risk, and to love more completely than he ever had before. Vulnerability unlocked in him a courage that had been dormant, showing him that the greatest intimacy comes not from perfection or control, but from the willingness to be fully human alongside someone who honors that humanity. Small gestures, big impact is the kind of truth that rarely appears in the stories people tell about love. It isn't the grand declarations or dramatic moments that leave a lasting mark, but the subtle, consistent actions that reveal care, attention, and understanding over time. He had experienced love before, but it often came with conditions or expectations, measured in words and acts designed to impress or prove commitment. She didn't need to impress him. She simply existed in ways that mattered quietly, deliberately, and persistently, shaping his understanding of what love could be. These gestures were small, almost mundane, a text to check if he had eaten, a hand resting lightly on his arm in a moment of doubt, a look that seemed to say she understood, without words, a willingness to wait when he needed space. None of these required grandiosity, yet each left an imprint on him. Over time, the accumulation of these moments reshaped how he viewed love. He realized that it isn't measured in dramatic statements or perfect timing, but in reliability, attention, and presence. A single gesture might be overlooked, but the constancy of care cannot be denied. LL gestures teach him patience too. They demonstrate that love isn't always urgent, explosive, or immediate. Sometimes the quietest acts carry the greatest weight because they signal intention without demanding acknowledgement. In this way, he learns that love is less about performance and more about consistency, less about what is said in the heat of passion, and more about what is done in the calm, ordinary hours of life. Her actions show him that caring deeply does not need to be performative. It needs only to exist, persistently and honestly, to shape the heart of the one receiving it. These moments also reveal her attentiveness, a rare and profound gift, in noticing the small things about him, what makes him uneasy, what makes him laugh, what he doesn't voice aloud. She communicates that he matters fully. Her attentiveness teaches him to notice himself in the same way, to acknowledge his own feelings and desires, without dismissing or overthinking them. Love, he discovers, can exist in detail as much as in passion, in repetition as much as in novelty. The small gestures act as a mirror, reflecting care back at him in a way that encourages him to respond similarly. Finally, small gestures create trust. They demonstrate that love does not have to be dramatic to be meaningful, and that reliability matters more than intensity. Through her consistent, understated acts, he learns that love is not something to be performed perfectly, but something to be expressed authentically, over and over, in ways both ordinary and tender. The cumulative effect transforms him. It reshapes his expectations, deepens his patience, and rewires his understanding of intimacy. He begins to approach relationships differently, knowing that love is built not on grand moments alone, but on the quiet, persistent, everyday acts that prove care repeatedly, without demand or fanfare. Lessons from contrast is a form of understanding that comes not from imitation or instruction, but from witnessing something profoundly different from what a person has known. He had loved before, but those experiences were often limited by fear, habit, or misunderstanding. His relationships followed familiar patterns, guarded emotions, rushed conclusions, or a tendency to protect himself more than to connect. Then she arrived, not to correct him, but simply by being herself, showing him what had been missing. Her presence created a mirror, reflecting the gaps in his own approach to love and revealing qualities he had never realized were possible. Through her patience, he learned the value of timing. Where he had once pushed for immediate answers or sought clarity too quickly, she demonstrated that love could unfold at its own pace. She held space for complexity, for hesitation, for imperfection, and in doing so, taught him that rushing intimacy or forcing understanding often undermines connection rather than strengthens it. Her steadiness contrasted sharply with the volatility or anxiety he had come to accept as normal. And through that contrast, he began to recognize the patterns in his own behavior that needed attention. Lessons from contrast also illuminate empathy and emotional presence. Watching her respond with care, even when situations were uncomfortable or unclear, he realized that he had often overlooked the quiet demands of another person's heart. She demonstrated that listening, G was more than hearing words, it was sensing needs, reading silences, and meeting emotions with patience rather than judgment. This contrasted with his habitual self-protectiveness, teaching him that love is less about control and more about attunement. He began to notice how often he had measured responses instead of truly engaging, and how much richer connection could be when effort was invested in understanding rather than performance. Her influence also reshaped his understanding of generosity and love through simple acts, attentive gestures, thoughtful decisions, consistent kindness. She showed him that love was not transactional. Where he had once equated giving with expectation, he now saw that authentic generosity comes without calculation, without the anticipation of repayment. This contrast exposed the limitations of his former approach, inviting him to adopt a deeper, freer way of loving that emphasized presence and care over validation or control. Finally, lessons from contrast are enduring because they are experiential rather than instructive. He didn't learn these truths from advice, books, or lectures. He learned them by living alongside her, noticing differences, and reflecting on how those differences reshaped his heart. The contrast between what he thought he knew about love and what he witnessed in her created a new template, one built on patience, empathy, and thoughtful attention. It altered not just his actions, but the way he perceived intimacy, trust, and emotional openness, leaving an imprint that persists long after the initial moments of revelation. Enduring imprint is the subtle, lasting influence someone can have on a person's heart and mind. Long after moments have passed, conversations have ended, or circumstances have shifted, her presence didn't merely create temporary warmth or excitement, it reshaped the way he experiences love, trust, and connection. The changes were not immediate or dramatic. They were quiet, cumulative, and profound, gradually embedding themselves into his behavior, perceptions, and emotional patterns. Even in moments when they were apart, her impact lingered, like sunlight filtered through clouds, visible, felt, and inescapably present. This enduring imprint is most evident in how he approaches intimacy. Before her, his love was cautious, fragmented, and measured. He gave only what he thought would be safe, holding back the parts of himself that felt vulnerable or fragile. She changed that without demanding it, simply by being a model of openness and consistency. In her presence, he learned that love could be expansive, not limiting, that giving freely could coexist with safety, that emotional honesty could be met with understanding rather than rejection. The lessons she imparted remained with him, shaping each interaction and decision long after the initial experiences. The imprint also manifests in how he listens and responds to others. Her patience and attentiveness taught him that connection is not just about speaking or acting, but about truly perceiving another person's experience. He noticed the ways she honored feelings, valued nuance, and approached differences without judgment. These lessons reshaped his empathy, giving him a deeper ability to meet others where they are, rather than projecting expectations or assumptions. Her influence created an internal standard that guided his behavior, teaching him that love is as much about presence and awareness as it is about grand gestures or words. Enduring imprint transformed self-awareness as well. He began to reflect on his patterns, recognizing tendencies toward fear, control, or hesitation, and consciously adjusting them. The awareness of how she approached life and relationships provided a template for growth. Her influence encouraged him to confront past habits without shame and to embrace vulnerability with confidence. It became a quiet compass, helping him navigate not only romantic connections but friendships, family bonds, and even the way he treated himself. Finally, the enduring imprint is inseparable from gratitude and respect. It is not about ownership or expectation, but about recognition of the change she catalyzed. Even if circumstances shifted or if distance grew, the lessons and transformations she inspired remained woven into the fabric of his heart. They became part of his emotional DNA, guiding him toward deeper trust, greater patience, and more authentic love. Her impact was not fleeting. It was a permanent recalibration of how he understands intimacy and connection, a living testament to the subtle power one person can have to shape another, not through force or demand, but simply by being consistent, present, and real. Gratitude over possession is a subtle but profound shift in the way someone experiences love. Before she came into his life, he had often approached relationships with the unspoken assumption that love was something to hold tightly, something to secure, as if control or ownership could guarantee connection. He measured attachment, expected reciprocity, and so, at times defined affection by the proximity or permanence of another person. Her presence changed that, not by instructing him, but by modeling a different approach, one in which love was appreciated for what it was, not for what it could be claimed to be. Through her, he learned that the deepest, most meaningful love does not require control. Gratitude over possession emphasizes valuing someone for their presence, their choices, and their essence rather than their availability or the assurance of their permanence. It's an acknowledgement that love is not a transaction or a possession, but a shared experience that exists in the moment and continues to exist even when circumstances change. In learning this, he realized that clinging, demanding, or attempting to own someone diminishes the authenticity of the bond, while gratitude cultivates freedom, respect, and enduring connection. This perspective reshapes how he expresses care, where he might have once measured attention, affection, or effort to ensure that love remained safe. He began to approach relationships with generosity and humility. Each gesture became less about securing a response and more about acknowledging the value of the other person, of simply being able to participate in the shared experience of connection. Gratitude encouraged him to be fully present, to savor moments of intimacy, and to appreciate subtle expressions of care without expectation. Even ordinary acts, shared laughter, a quiet conversation, a supportive glance, became profound, because he no longer sought to control or claim them. Gratitude over possession also transforms internal experience. It shifts the focus from fear of loss to appreciation of presence, from anxiety over what might slip away to attention to what is present now. He learned that love can be richer, more durable, and more resilient when it is freely given and received without strings attached. This doesn't diminish emotional depth, it enhances it. When love is framed by appreciation rather than ownership, vulnerability becomes safer, trust deepens, and emotional risk is taken consciously rather than compulsively. Finally, this lesson extends beyond the romantic sphere. Gratitude over possession affects how he interacts with friends, family, and even himself. It encourages respect for boundaries, recognition of autonomy, and acknowledgement of the beauty in impermanence. He came to understand that the most meaningful connections are not measured by control, but by awareness, care, and appreciation. Love becomes a force that nurtures rather than confines, a space where freedom and intimacy coexist. By internalizing this shift, he learned to love not to possess, but to honor, not to claim, but to value, and not to demand, but to celebrate the presence of another person in the fullest and most genuine way possible. In the end, the story of how one woman changed the way he loves is not about grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It is about subtle, enduring transformation. She didn't teach him to love through instruction or demand. She reshaped him simply by being present, patient, and authentic. Through her, he discovered the courage to be vulnerable, the power of small, consistent acts of care, the clarity that contrast can bring, and the quiet strength of gratitude over possession. She left an imprint that lingers in the way he listens, gives, and trusts, in the way he approaches intimacy with patience and empathy, and in the way he chooses presence over control. Her influence shows that love is not about perfection or ownership, but about being fully present, valuing what exists, and allowing connection to flourish freely. Some people come into your life and change how you love forever, and she was that person for him.